All you bees. Hey, we're here today in the hive and we have a really great show for you today. So we're really excited. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to have a special guest from the 1968 Whitman Stadium and from 1969 opening of Costa Mesa Speedway. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to have this special guest. His name is right here. He was a good rider and it's Mr. Greg Hasorot. Hey, there he is. Mr. Greg, how you doing,
Hey,
Greg?
Brian.
Oh,
Good, my
I got
friend. How are
you.
you?
I got you going crazy here. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much. And welcome to the Beehive, Greg
All
Hasorot.
right.
Oh, we're so glad to have you on the show. And um, I was going to ask you a question. What's your earliest memories of being a motorcycle rider? What happened to you?
Well, my story is probably a little bit different than most. I was always, my dad was raced motorcycles his whole life, and he worked at a motorcycle dealership in downtown Los Angeles. He was a Rich Butelier, Harley Davidson dealership, was a huge dealer. And so I grew up around motorcycles. I grew up more interested in regular sports than motorcycles, although we would go to Ascot Park every Friday night from, I think, like 1959, when I was like 9 years old, all the way into the 60s. We would go, and I loved watching the half mile. I loved watching all the racers that were out there, and I always wanted to do that. But when I was a kid, I never had a motorcycle, but my dad, we started racing quarter midgets. That was real popular like in the mid 50s. So like in about 1957, I think I was 7 years old till I was about 12. I raced at Montebello racetrack, and I became an expert there racing quarter midgets. And some of the guys that we raced against, we went to Las Vegas one time, and people that are that know about race cars or about midget racing. Sleepy Trip was there, raced against him, raced against Gary Scott, and his brother Hank was too little at the time, but Gary, who became an AMA national champion in 1975, we became friends. And so at 12 years old, I quit racing cars. I didn't ride a motorcycle until I was 16, and I bought a Hodaka from a place over in Montebello. A guy named Steve Hurd owned a dealership, a Hodaka, and I think a Matchless and BMW dealership, if you can believe all three of those together. And Steve, in his own right, was a great desert racer. And he was number one District 37 heavyweight District 37 desert racer at one point in his career. But I bought a Hodaka. Went out to my dad. We went out by the 605 freeway. There was nothing out there. It was just dirt, and there was a place to ride. And I was there. Rode one time. Went out the second time. Ran into Gary Scott of all people and his dad, and they said, "Hey, you got to come out to Paris, and start racing." So after my second week of riding a motorcycle, we went out to Paris on the third week, and they put a pie plate on my bike, and I started racing, and I ended up making the main. I got like 10th, I think, out of probably 12 guys in the main, but then I started racing. So my racing career was basically, I never had a motorcycle riding for fun career. It just went from racing at Paris and Elsinore, all the District 37 TT races, and then I got introduced to Speedway. That was when I was 18, so 1968. And so we went from racing the Hodaka to jumping on a Jawa. So it's kind of a big jump.
Yeah, that was a big jump. I'm going to move that camera a little bit. Most people, when they ride motorcycles, they actually practice. They ride mini bikes. They're riding. Me too. I'm riding, and you just went ahead and said, "I want to race." What? That's crazy.
Yeah, it was quite a bit different, So, but I remember riding at Paris. Scott Autry was out there. Gary Scott was out there. Freddie Edwards, Steve Nichols. a lot of guys. A guy named Dave Ham, who was I ended up buying his Hodaka later on, so it was faster than mine. I had a little stock Hodaka, and so a lot of these guys, they would graduate from the Paris and Elsinore, and they would move on to Ascot for on the half mile, which is what I wanted to do also. But in 1968, I think it might have been even late 67, my brother, Bruce, who was racing at Ascot at the time, and he had been there a couple of years, he was part of a group of guys that got invited, or they started racing at Whitman Stadium, and they had these old JAP, these old Jap motorcycles, these old Speedway bikes that had been taken out of the mothballs, had been, sitting, silent for many, many years. And Jerry Fairchild, or maybe his son, Brian, I think, they started bringing these bikes out.
Butch. His name is Butch, his brother. Butch?
Was it Butch? Yeah, Butch. Butch Fairchild. That's right. I was young. That was a long time ago. And but my brother was working for a guy named Joe Kubicek, who was the Jawa importer. And so he had a Jawa. So we went out to watch him race out at Whitman, because all the guys that raced at Ascot on Friday night, a lot of them came out to start racing at Whitman on Saturday night, just for fun. It was not a lot of money involved, but it was just something different. And I went out there and watched him, and I just fell in love with it. The first time I saw it, I went, man, this is so cool. And it wasn't long after that my dad showed up one afternoon with a brand new Jawa on the back of the pickup truck. And it was $750. It came with a parts kit, included a parts kit, which was a connecting rod, valves, piston, wrist pin, all kinds of parts, valve springs. That was all included in the purchase of the motorcycle, with a couple sprockets also. And it didn't take long for Joe Kubicek to figure out that he didn't have to give that away. So that all the parts used to go into stock, and he'd sell them to you later. But at that point, it was so fresh and so new that they hadn't figured out it was time not to give the parts kit away with the purchase of the motorcycle. So for $750, you got a brand new 500cc Jawa. And they were the ones that were supposed to go to Australia, because they had a 2-speed box. And they had a first gear and a second gear, but you never used first gear unless you were going to race like a half mile. And so that's how we got started.
Well, you should tell Bill Cody to do the same thing nowadays with 889 Jawas, to go ahead and give those valve springs, new pistons, new forks, and everything.
Well, I really doubt that they have a parts kit that comes with that motorcycles now. I'm sure that all changed. It didn't probably last very long, but fortunately for us, we were on the front side of that part of it. So we were fortunate to get all the parts. And my dad was my mechanic, so he was a great mechanic. So we never had an engine failure in all the years that I raced.
Wow, that's amazing. So going back, so you went ahead and you saw your brother, your Bruce, race, and he was racing at was he racing at the Whitman Stadium initially, or?
Yeah, he raced. Yeah, initially he actually raced at Ascot. He was a half miler. He rode a Yamaha. He was a novice for a couple of years. Got enough points. Became I guess they called him a junior then, and so he was riding a Harley. And so, but a lot of the guys, since he was riding for Kubicek, he worked for Kubicek, who owned the Jawa distributorship. And a guy named Dude Criswell was the guy who started the revival of Speedway as we know it now. And he used to race Speedway back, I think, in the early 50s, right before it kind of disappeared for whatever reasons. And so he was the promoter for Whitman Stadium. And Whitman itself was an interesting track because it was a track that was built inside another track. It was actually an asphalt racetrack that had a banked corner on one end and a flat corner on the other end. And it was like a third of a mile. And they built the Speedway track inside that. So the only crash wall that you had was along the back straightaway. One end, the turns 1 and 2 were just open, and then 3 and 4 was where the pits were. And the front straightaway had no walls either. So if you got bumped, you just went out onto the asphalt and just try to get back on the track and keep going. But the track was about 220 yards around. It was a little bit bigger than Costa Mesa, and it was more like a D-shaped. That was real wide, and it was really a lot of fun to ride because it was nice and thick. You could, it had a good base on it, so you could really back it in, and it had a lot of grip. So that's where it all started.
Wow. So the people, I guess the stands for the spectators was on that straightaway, and I guess the people sat back behind the straightaway at Whitman, right? They sat kind of, how far back did you sit? They sit far?
Yeah, on the other side of the asphalt. So they weren't like right on top of the riders, not like Costa Mesa. Costa Mesa, how it became where you could you're in the turn, you can get hit by, get a glass full of beer, you can get a glass full of dirt in it if you're standing too close. So yeah, it was a little bit further away, and it was in Pacoima, not exactly the hot spot of places you wanted to go and spend a lot of time. And right next to Whitman Air Park, and there was some projects across the street that were over there. It was quite the interesting place. I remember one night, because you would hear gunshots every now and then, but somebody got hit with a spent bullet that was in the grandstands. I mean, so not that they weren't injured all that badly, but that's the kind of location it was. So it was an interesting place to be.
So who was the top riders at Whitman? Was it like Sonny Nutter, and let's see, who else was there? Bass came along later, but he wasn't. The Bass brothers were kind of new, raw, so they weren't really the top. But Sonny Nutter, and you probably have like Sammy Tanner, and then you have that was like the big gun. Rick Woods was really, he was the champion that year. So Rick Woods, who else was good there?
Well, a lot of guys. I mean, I printed out this was a program of who that riders that were there on the. But a lot of guys were from Ascot, so you had people sign up. It was, Rick Woods, of course. There was John Haley. Little John Haley was a very good rider. A lot of guys were racing at Ascot, racing Class C half mile, and that's what they were going to do. There was, Stu Morley was there, Sammy Tanner, a guy named Shorty Seaborn, who was a national number, Marty McDonald. He was also a very good rider. He rode at Ascot. Elliot Schultz, Sonny, of course. Sonny, Rick Woods, Jimmy Nicholson, who was a great rider. Blackie Bruce. But guys like that, those were guys that were probably in their 30s or whatever the ages they were. They were a little bit older. Some of the guys were like beyond their prime, but they still signed up to race Speedway because they wanted to try it. Swede Savage was one of the guys that rode there. Swede Savage went on to race Indy cars. Jack Simmons, Mike Conley was there. He rode. See who else was there. Jay Carter. A lot of guys that would be Dwayne Keeter, for instance, was very well known at Ascot. So a lot of the Ascot regulars went over and rode at Whitman. And then guys like Steve Bass and Mike Bass were still amateurs. They were still riding. They weren't professionals yet. And I think Mike might have been around 16. And so that made Steve probably a little bit older, around 18 or so, 17. They were pretty close in age. So, it was kind of an eclectic group of people. And a lot of people just wanted to try to ride one of these old JAP motorcycles and see what it was all about. And it became really, really popular with the riders, because they had a lot of fun, and it became, popular with the fans too. So, it wasn't until things got serious was when Ivan Major came over. Ivan, for those who don't know, was world champion that year, and they brought him over, I think, the week after he won the world final. And it was really cool because he came in right in the middle of the meeting. And they kept him, as I remember, this is all based on my memory, kept him separate from all the other riders. And what was cool was he brought his handlebars or his carburetor, whatever the stuff he brought with him on the plane. So they fixed the motorcycle and got it the way he wanted it, and they kept him away from everybody else. And then he went up to the starting line, and I remember saying to myself, and maybe even talking to some other people, thinking, you know what? I know this guy's a world champion, and I've never seen anybody ride a Speedway bike before, but how much faster could he go around the track than the guys that we have here? I mean, we've guys here that are national numbers that have won national races. How fast can he be? And I was kind of skeptical. And so he rolls up to the starting line, and he just rolls the throttle on, and he drops the clutch on that Jap. And I think that motorcycle never took a breath for 4 laps. And he just never shut off. And it was like incredible. I mean, it gave me goosebumps. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe anybody could go that fast on that motorcycle. And then he was standing up in the corners, standing up. What is all that? It was so foreign to what we were accustomed to, because we all sat down, like you did on a regular flat tracker. And what an eye opener. I tell you, it was incredible. It was a night that I'll never forget, because it just changed everything for everybody. So they put him in the races, insert him in the races, handicapped him, put him half a lap behind, and within 2 laps he passed everybody. So then we realized that we really weren't all that fast.
You guys got a lesson from Ivan Major, the great Ivan Major.
We got schooled big time.
You guys were all like TT riders. You're sitting on your butt on the back of the seat. You guys were flat tracking it, like, ah! And then Ivan's like, no, that's not how you ride a Speedway bike. This is how you ride a Speedway bike.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what happened. And then as a result of that, Ivan and then Barry Briggs came over. So sometime later, they put on a school, because Whitman would always be open for practice, open practice on weekends or like on Sundays. So we had a lot of chance to ride, but they put on a school, and then we had a lot of the guys that wanted to be Speedway riders went to that school. There were a lot of guys that didn't. They wanted to continue in the Class C part of it, and it kind of separated a lot of the people out at that time. So that was also the very first time I think that Bill Cody actually rode a Speedway bike, was at the practice in that school that they put on. And I loaned Bill my bike to learn, and it was so foreign to everybody, but to him, and he'd never even been on a Speedway bike anyway. So he went to every corner, he'd fall down, get up, he'd take off, and he'd fall down. But it didn't take long before he wasn't falling down, and after that, he was going way faster than just about everybody else. And Bill, for many years, was one of the very top Speedway riders there ever has been. And he was a flat tracker. He was he raced with Sonny over there in Ascot Park. And so a lot of guys decided to make that jump from flat track to Speedway. And I don't think any of them that did ever regretted it.
No. Bill Cody, he went ahead and raced the mile over, and so when he was racing those Harley 750s, and he was racing like Mert Lawwell and Gene Romero, the Burrito, and I mean, this guy was good. He was in the top couple in points, top 5 in the pro TT circuit. And then, I mean, Bill Cody, like, he had a resume like you wouldn't believe. And then I guess he was the top money earner in Costa Mesa. He was number 1 for like a few years, and then he went to the top 5. So Bill Cody made a lot of money. Yeah,
he made a lot of money. There's no doubt about it. And Bill was very good at making it and very good at keeping it. Also, he became the distributor for Jawa, and he's done a fantastic job. He's got a great business, and has helped a lot of people along the way become really good Speedway riders. And Bill, we all have debt of gratitude to Bill for the job that he's done all these years. He's been in the Speedway business for close to 50 years. But yeah, back in the days when the mile racing, Sonny rode the mile, Sammy Tanner has won many miles, in his career. Sammy Tanner was an incredible racer at Ascot Park. He had the distinction of winning at Ascot over 400 races at Ascot in his career,
Wow.
from like 1958 or 59 to whenever it was that he quit racing at Ascot. So, yeah, there were some really, really good riders that came over, and they had a lot of talent. And they became really top speedway riders. And then you had guys like Mike Bast, who adapted to it and became so proficient and so good at his profession that he was just a dominating force. And he's one of those guys that had the two things that you need to be a champion. He had incredible talent, and he had a work ethic that was second to none. And when you put those two things together, a lot of times you get champions, and not just a one-off. You get guys that dominate, and that's what Mike did for many, many years.
Well, Mike, he won. He had all that with him, and also he used his brain when he raced. I mean, Mike was like a computer. I mean, when he raced, he had everything planned out. Mike really had like a focus, like a genius.
Yeah, he did. And Mike, he was in shape too. That guy was built. He was strong as all get out, and he was real wiry, but he didn't have an ounce of fat on him. So he took good care of himself. He worked. He didn't party. He did all the things you needed to do. And let me tell you, there was a lot of partying going on there in those early days of Speedway. It just, just the nature of the beast, I think. But Steve, his brother, was a tremendous talent also. Yeah, I think Steve had more natural talent than Mike did, but he just wasn't able to apply it quite as well as Mike did, especially in these big situations. But Steve was one great competitor as well.
Steve was amazing. Steve was one of my favorite. I like Mike, but everybody hated Mike, so I like Steve. And everybody booed Mike because he won so much, and he was beating Rick Woods every time. Mike Bass was like the villain of Costa Mesa. I mean, everybody hated Mike Bass. And I was a little kid, and I liked Steve Bass a lot because he was cool.
Yeah, he was. Steve was a great guy. I like Steve. In 1972, there was team racing at Costa Mesa, and they had every track had a team, and I was fortunate to be on the Costa Mesa Lions, and on that team was Rick Woods, Steve Bast, myself, a guy named Jim Fishburne, and Don Cullum, and his dad Pee Wee Cullum was a great Speedway rider back in the 30s and 40s, and there might have been Ron Stewart was on that team also. So I had a lot of times Steve and I we would pair up together. So I got a chance to ride with Steve a lot in the team events, and I learned a lot from just riding next to him or trying to ride with him. So yeah, it was a great experience for me to spend time riding with him.
When I was a little boy at the Mesa, I used to always look in the pits and look at the racers, like when they were racing and stuff. And I always remember Steve Bass was all like before the race, he was all like, he was so intense, and he was like, wow, that guy is crazy. Like he's just so like into it, and he's wired up, and he wants to go out and kick some ass. And he was really like a maniac guy, and I like that guy.
Well, back then it was a lot of fun. Speedway grew, a lot quickly. I mean, we went from one track, which was Whitman, which was 68, and then in 69, that was the second season. And I'm not sure it even finished the entire second year. But the one thing, the very first race in 1969 was an afternoon event. And Steve McQueen was the celebrity starter for that race that day. So we all got a chance to meet Steve McQueen, and that was pretty cool. And then the crowds got a little bit bigger, and then Harry Oxley became involved because he worked at Milne Brothers, the big motorcycle dealership in Pasadena. He was the GM for them, I believe. And he worked for Jack and Cordy. And of course, there's a lot of Speedway history there as well, because Jack was the world champion in 1938. I believe 37, 38.
37.
And then, 37, and his brother Cordy finished second, and then Lammy Lamoureux finished third. I think it's the only time that first, second, third place, I think in the history of it, has ever been from one country, and that was happened just that one time. So, but yeah.
I was going they had not only one country, America, but one city, Pasadena. They're all from
Right.
Pasadena, California. Let's see that one happen again. And I always said that, like, maybe that was when the song "The Little Old Lady from Pasadena" was sung. The little old lady from Pasadena, bong bong bong.
I don't know, but yeah, that's right. They all came from Pasadena, and yeah, that was that must have been quite the time. So
Wow, that's amazing. Can you tell me the story about you raced at Whitman Stadium?
oh
And
yeah,
I guess beginning of the races, they didn't have Stewart, picking the balls out of the hat
yeah,
like Ryan
yeah,
Evans does. I guess it is. And then back in the early days of Whitman, I actually used to have to fight for your pole position. So the first guy that got bumped off had to race for the spot. So tell me what happened with you and Sonny
yeah.
Nutter.
Well, that's how I recall it. Is that they didn't have Mike Capolite was a pit steward, and so when the races when it would end, then they tell you could fire up your bike and go, to the starting line. But there was no, I don't remember at all that there you pull. I mean, they did later, but you didn't draw a number. It was the first race was from the pits to the starting line. Whoever got there first got their pick us where they wanted to start. And I remember this particular race. I told my dad, "Come on, we got to get going here." And he fired that thing, and I raced out there, and I got to the pole. I was on the pole, and everybody else was in line. And all of a sudden, Sonny comes up, and he lines up inside me. Now he lines up on the infield, and he looks over at me, and he gives me one of these like move over. And so I'm thinking to myself, what do I do? I mean, I was here first. Why do I have to move over? Because it's Sonny Nutter, and I was young and green, and I was 18, and I only been doing it for a short time, and I think I probably did move over, but I'll never forget though looking over at him and looking at him. I'm thinking, what is he doing? He's on the infield, and but it was his way to intimidate us and tell me, hey, I'm Sonny Nutter. I'm a star here. You move over. So I think I probably did. But I got back at Sonny, and he'll tell you, I'm the only guy. He's only had stitches one time in his life. Well, probably more than that now, but when he was racing. And I was the one that gave him about, I think, 5 or 6 stitches in his ankle. So he always blames me for doing that. But
I just crashed into Sonny or something.
I don't remember. He remembers it. I don't know if I ran over him or used him for what. I don't really remember, but he remembers. Every time I see him, he goes, "Yeah, you're the one that gave me all those stitches in my leg." I said, "Well, sorry."
Well, you were a wild man, a young wild boy when you were a racer. You were kind of like, I read this story with Larry Huffman. In fact, I have it right here. I have it right here. It's a program 72. I just did that on my last show. And it had an interview with you and Larry Huffman. And Larry Huffman said that he asked you all these questions, and Huffman said, you had quite a few ups and downs. You seemed, whenever you start and got out front, you would crash, and you would have some injury to slow you down.
That's
You're
true.
a wild boy.
Yeah, I know. Well, like I told you, I think I would have benefited a lot more if I would have had a few more years of racing season. But yeah, I was either going to win or die. It's kind of like, and I remember one night I got hooked up with Mike Conley. I crashed on the back straightaway, kind of a big endo thing, and I knocked the wind out of me, and I kind of jumped up, and I wanted to get off the track, and I couldn't run, so I just rolled over the fence and lay down there on the concrete on the other side of the fence, and all these kids came running over, and they're looking down at me, and I'm just like laying there, and one kid goes, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" So like hoping that I was done for, so they could see some dead person that was racing. And I said, "No, I'm not dead." So I got up and hobbled off the track. But yeah, I had my share of crashes. I think that probably really hurt my career because then I got too cautious. I didn't want to fall down, which is never a good sign when you're trying to win races. So I think that's probably why I didn't last until I was only like 25.
Yeah, well, you were a good rider. You had some good rides, and
Yeah,
you really had some good races. You were like dicing with all the big boys. You were like, you were getting
yeah.
crazy maybe a little bit, but you were fighting those guys.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was a good rider. I was like on the average, probably a 30 yard on the handicaps, probably 30-yard guy. I got to the 40 a couple times, 20s, 30s is where I spent most of my time. And, I had some, I had some wins, like anybody. And I always tell everybody else, hey, if it wasn't for the guys that were a little bit slower, then the fast guys wouldn't have anybody to beat, would they? So I think that's just the way it is. I had some talent. I had a lot of desire, but my talent was only going to carry me so far. And I like the big tracks, better. We had a race one time down in Tijuana, which was quite the event. It was a quarter mile on the quarter mile track, like a running track. And
Nice.
I did pretty well down there. I did good. The bigger the track, the better I did. And I won a few races down there, and it was a lot of fun. The track was super dangerous. They put a hay bale in front of every one of the light poles, the poles that would be there for the nighttime when they had football, well, soccer games probably. And then they had one corner had like a 4-inch concrete little edging around it. And then you went off into the basketball court, which was like 15 feet down below that. So you didn't want to go off in that corner because that probably would have been the end of everything for you. And and the track was hard and slick, and we wore out every tire that we had. We'd flip them over and use the other side, and we just finally ran out of tires. And but overall, I did fairly well. The thing that was really interesting was that the racetrack on the other side of the racetrack, they had the grandstands on the front straightaway. On the other side, there were very few grandstands, but there was a gully, and there was across that gully, thousands of people sat on that gully and watched the races and didn't have to pay a dime. They watched them for free, and the people that were in the grandstands were very few because they didn't have to pay. They could go on the other side and watch for free. So as a result, it looked like we all got paid, I think, $50 a piece, as I remember. And I think Dude Crizzle was the promoter, and I think he tried to run off with all the money, and I think he got some help with Sammy Tanner because he got his car stuck in the mud, and Sammy didn't know any better. He helped try to push him out of it, and off he went. So as I recall it, we all got $50 and had a great time, but he basically ran off with most of the money. Did I lose you? Griefer.